Good afternoon to you all, and a very warm welcome to this ad hoc committee on COVID-19. I'd like to welcome all the members of the committee present this afternoon. I'd also like to welcome the procedural officers, as well as any members of the public or media that might be joining us live on YouTube. Let's start with some apologies. I have received an apology from Honourable Bosman. Honourable Mackenzie will be in his place as an alternate member today. And we have received apologies from Honourable Heron and from Honourable Christians. Are there any further apologies, please? None. If there are no further apologies, then as usual, I'll start with the rules of engagement for virtual meetings. All members were muted at the start of the meeting to avoid background noises. I would ask that if there are any points of order during proceedings, if members would please use the raise hand function, alternately to indicate so in the chat function. We ask that all video and audio is switched off during proceedings to improve the quality of the connection. However, if you are speaking or making an input, we do ask that you put on your microphone, of course, as well as your video. If you are sharing any documents, if you would then unshare at the end of the presentation. All right, so today's meeting is to deliberate on the public inputs that we received. We received just under 17,000 written submissions, not only written, but also some WhatsApp messages, emails and WhatsApps, as well as requests for oral submissions. As you all know, those requests for oral submissions were heard by the committee in a few meetings ago, where we heard from Freedom of Religion, we heard from Professor Atmore, etc., as well as other members of the public that asked to speak to the committee. We then had the social media campaign as well as advertisements in the newspapers, which resulted in a substantial amount of written comment. The committee then divided itself into 5 working groups, and thank you very much, members. It was a very big task. It was a lot of work to get through 17,000 submissions. So I thank you very much for having worked tirelessly through those submissions and taking all of those comments into account. So today we will hear back from those working group sessions which took place last week, Thursday and Friday. I'm going to ask a representative from each working group to present their report and feedback from their working group on those public submissions. We had presented a template, which was a guideline just to assist the working groups to organize the information. However, you're free to report back in any which way you so please. The procedural officers will then capture the resolutions from all 5 working groups, and then we'll work on that together as a committee and decide on the resolutions we'd like to make as a result of those public submissions. So with that being said, I think let's get into the working groups. Let's start with working group 1. I believe that's you, Honourable Botha.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. That is me. Chair, as you are well aware, it was the 2 of us in this working group. Member Christians rendered an apology and Member Dugmore was absent. In regard to the themes that we have worked on, I'm just going to highlight the prominent insights of the themes that was covered as per the template. It was the exposure to the virus and experience of the health system, food support availability, attitudes towards mask wearing, access to COVID-19 grants, workplace safety, availability and use of personal protective equipment on public transport, social distancing and temperature checks at schools, views on the reopening of early childhood development centres. The work group has considered approximately 4,000 submissions that were made in writing, WhatsApp and voice notes from members of the public in terms of the identified themes. The submissions were considered under each theme. Chair, may I just ask the procedural officer who assisted the working group 1, maybe it would be better just to have the report on the screen. Sorry, I'm interrupting myself now, yeah? Or may I continue the way I have started? I'm just checking with the rest and yourself. Is no one hearing me?
Sorry, there seems to be some interference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davids. So, in regard to the exposure to the virus and experience of the health system, comments from members of the public noted that support received after receiving a positive COVID-19 test result was inconsistent. Some received regular contact checks while others did not. Similar, some received food parcels while in isolation and others did not. Some commented that the COVID-19 medical test was painful to undertake, while several other comments made it clear that there was a lack of understanding of the testing regime, which also changed over time. There was one person who commented that the private healthcare's X-ray screening protocols were poor. Some comments noted the disappointment that COVID-19 testing in the private sector was not subsidized. Also, residents commented that they received no remuneration during the self-isolation period. In regard to food support availability, there was an indication that the access to food availability was challenging, but the accessing of sanitizers were also problematic. Concerns were raised about the rise in starvation in South Africa due to the pandemic, as well as the unequal distribution of food parcels during the pandemic. And then with regards to the attitude toward mask wearing, there were an overwhelming support for the wearing of masks. And that this included some comments that those who were caught not wearing masks should be arrested and face prosecution. Although some stakeholders were against the wearing of masks, many expressed reluctance to wear masks, but they would wear one anyway. Concerns were highlighted in terms of the correct use of masks, including not enough information being available on the use and management of masks. And this included how often masks were to be worn and the frequency of the washing of masks. Pertaining to the access to COVID-19 grants, stakeholders indicated that their applications were rejected without providing reasons, while there was a belief that there was an inconsistent approval and disbursement of grants. The older persons stood in long queues to draw their SASSA grants. There were long waiting times for the SASSA grants, and there was no social distancing in the queues. The SASSA call center did not answer calls which queried SASSA grant payouts. Stakeholders indicated that they were unsure how to access grants, including how to access and apply for indigent grants. The Unemployment Insurance Fund offices were also closed during the pandemic, and maybe Chair, that should be during the lockdown of the pandemic, which made it challenging to draw UIF payouts. The stakeholders also indicated that their concerns around the corruption around the 350 Rand COVID relief 19 grant payout that was earmarked for unemployed and older persons. In addition, the stakeholders said that there was an unfair disbursement of support, which was based on race. In regard to workplace safety, stakeholders indicated that small businesses were not recipients of any aid during the pandemic. There was also no employee contact tracing that was carried out by the businesses, who indicated that the employees tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. The availability and use of the PPE on public transport, that was a great concern. And the concern was around that sanitizers were not always available on public transport, including the use of questionable sanitizing products by public transport providers. Some stakeholders were of the opinion that public transport providers use their own self-made concoctions, as they termed it, as sanitizers. There was also a belief that the public transport providers were not adhering to the PPE protocols as communicated by government, and many inputs received thought it unfair that taxis could operate at 100% capacity while there were restrictions on other sorts of gatherings or visiting family members. In regard to the social distancing and temperature checks at schools, stakeholders raised concern around the fact that school fees had to be paid while the children were homeschooling. There were also disapproval around the fact that when children were requested to attend school, that government employees were working virtually from home and was not required to return to their offices. Some stakeholders noted that the distribution of PPE at schools was satisfactory. In regard to the views on the reopening of ECD centres, there was an indication, there was disappointment that parents were left stranded without support for their childcare needs as ECD centres remained closed during the COVID-19 pandemic. In regard to the major recurring inputs on issues outside of the themes just mentioned, I just mentioned a few of what was and what came out of our 4,000 submissions that we handled. The ban on alcohol and cigarettes was unfair and caused a lot of caused a loss of revenue for the South African government. An overwhelming amount of input that the regulations were either irrational and completely unnecessary, or that some of the regulations were not necessary at all. Few submissions indicated support for the regulations, however. The lockdown regulation destroyed the economy as well as incurring financial loss of the country and its citizens. Stakeholders raised concerns that the regulations had violated certain human rights and had eroded freedoms afforded by the Constitution. The South African Broadcasting Corporation could have played a bigger role in online learning for children when schools were closed. Residents experienced a loss of income or were put on furlough. Loss of life occurred through the rapid spread of COVID-19. COVID-19 also caused fear of being in contact with each other due to the risk that they might become infected. The Western Cape government did a good job during the pandemic to keep the citizens informed through awareness programs and executing good governance practices. The information from national government was conflicting between the presidential address and the address of the ministers. The information provided to citizens by the president on the status of the pandemic was infrequent. Stakeholders raised concerns on the psychological and emotional impact the pandemic had on the citizens, children, and on marriages. Moreover, there were concerns raised on potential suicides due to job losses. There were psychological impacts on families not being able to see one another and spend some time with one another. Corruption and self-enrichment by some officials and politicians were unethical. Stakeholders were in agreement with the initial lockdown period that was initiated by the president or by President Ramaphosa, but the subsequent lockdowns and regulations caused a loss of trust in the national government as well as the National Command Council. The night curfew imposed reduced crime, pollution, and noise. Concerns were raised over the inability of the Department of Home Affairs to register and process key life documents. There was concern raised that there was a failure in the criminal justice system. Arrests have been irrational under the lockdown, including the excessive force that were used by the South African Defence Force as well as the South African Police Services on civilians. Concerns were raised of the release of prisoners during the lockdown. Concerns were raised on the release of prisoners. A major concern for stakeholders were the increase in gender-based violence. There was concerns around the municipal rates that has increased during this time, although citizens, they had strain on their finances. The ban on the use of nature reserves was also a concern. That, together with a ban on exercise for healthcare workers, was seen as unfair. Stakeholders indicated anger through their submissions. The vulnerable and sick should have been isolated, was many of the concerns raised. The fitness, tourism, music and arts and culture industries were negatively impacted by the lockdown, as well as the real estate and film industries were also affected negatively. Salaries and care to nurses should be reviewed. Stakeholders could not print any grant applications or regulation forms as the internet cafes were all closed during the lockdown. This was in regard to some of the offices that were closed during the lockdown. Citizens who were dependent on chronic medication experienced challenges in accessing their prescriptions. There was a lack of financial assistance from financial institutions like banks. There was no support given to the middle-class citizen. Stakeholders raised concern that some of them were unable to obtain permits to feed the hungry during the pandemic. The closing of the e-commerce sector during the pandemic was ill-conceived. There was confusion on how to apply to access funds through the Solidarity Fund. Stakeholders also believe that the Solidarity Fund could only benefit some citizens and not everyone. Not all schools provided feeding schemes to the learners who were negatively affected by the lockdown. As we all know, that feeding schemes continued at some schools and not at others. And learners who normally would get a meal at their particular school where they are a learner at, they had to access it from a neighboring school. There were inadequate public education initiatives and drives around the COVID-19 pandemic. In regard to how can the concerns or aspirations raised by the public be reflected in our recommendations, we said that there should be continued communication campaigns on the wearing of masks, as well as on how to use them, including social distancing. Government should communicate clearly on the COVID-19 testing regime, and especially if any changes are affected in these protocols, the UIF should open their offices in order for stakeholders to access their funds. SASSA should assist beneficiaries with applications and be transparent in its application processes. SASSA should ensure that safety protocols are implemented and maintained at paypoint queues. Financial support should be given to all affected people, not just on the basis of race. Traffic officials should enforce the implementation and use of sanitizers in public transport. And the taxi industry should play an active role to enforce PPE compliance in taxis. The SABC should play a bigger role in home learning. Psychological support should be provided to children, elderly, and the disabled who reside in care facilities. Chair, that is then the report in regard to the working group 1.
Thank you very much, Honourable Botha. That was very comprehensive. Thank you very much for that feedback. We'll then move on to Group 2. Honourable Mitchell, will you be giving the feedback on that one?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll do the feedback, if I can go. Honourable Chairperson, I'm going to speak to the submissions received and those that the working group has gone through, but I want to just from the offset state that the submissions we received was from survey questions posed by a public engagement portal called Dear South Africa, and because the committee felt very strongly that submissions cannot be discarded in whichever form they received, we actually went through the submissions, and so for that reason, with your indulgence, I will go straight to section B, where of the proposed template, and which we've altered to make sure that we do justice to this process. So with regards to the regulations, most people or submissions with regards to the regulations were in agreement with the regulation and indicated that that some of the regulations should have been more strictly enforced. The overwhelming sentiments were that some of the regulations did not make sense when it came to the following matters: the closure of municipalities and government services, the curfews, the queues at government pay points with regards to SASSA, the 100% taxi occupancy versus family religious gathering and their limitations, the freedom of choice with regards to smoking and drinking, the travel ban within the country, and the opening of schools versus not to open schools until the peak is over. With regards to the health system and experiences with felt or exposed during this process, the overall response were that the health system in South Africa were not fully functional and prepared for the pandemic, and that the initial lockdown announced by the president should have been to utilize to adequately prepare the healthcare system to deal with the pandemic, but it highlighted the complete mismanagement of the healthcare system in South Africa. With regards to food parcels and food support and availability, many submissions or many people felt that the food parcels that were promised were never delivered. There was a clear mismanagement of the manner in which the process of food parcel was handled. That food parcels were not necessarily received by the correct or identified recipients, and that there was no consequences to the persons who managed the process. There was one submission that highlighted the fact that the theft of food parcels are actually despicable, that food parcels were used for personal and political gain, and that food parcels were distributed in certain areas only and were not available to all poor and needy people, and it was with a reference to race and geographical spread. Most submissions with regards to the wearing of masks indicated that masks should be worn, with the odd submission indicating that they would refuse to wear a mask, and that the wearing of mask is actually unnecessary, but they will still do it. With regards to grants, Chair, the view from the submissions were that grants are being stolen, social grants were not enough or adequate. The grants in future should be paid electronically and not have people standing in queues for hours. There's hardly any transparency where funds were allocated in terms of who the beneficiaries are with regards to the various grants. That there was complete chaos at some of the social grant payout points, and that the process of applying for grants and UIF are difficult, especially for those persons living in rural areas. There was no submissions received with regards to workplace safety and with regards to PPE on public transport. And the vast concern with regards to that from the public was that taxis are allowed to operate at 100% and that there would be an increase to the COVID-19 infection rate. We received no submissions or comments on with regards to the social distancing at schools, and then there was one submission made with that was received with regards to the reopening of ECD centers and creches, with a view that parents should decide whether it's safe for their children to be at these facilities or not. Chair, how these concerns or aspiration raised by the public could be reflected in our recommendation. There seemed to be, Chair, that overwhelming distrust in national government and the decisions made by government in respect of regulations, that national governments should put together a support and economic recovery plan, because that is needed, that a public education process should be recommended on the grant process and government support system and how it should be accessed in various communities, because there seemed to be a lack of understanding with regards to how government support systems work. And then socio-economic intervention by national government should be better implemented, and then once it's implemented, communicated in a manner that would make it accessible to the most vulnerable people. Chair, and then in conclusion, if I may, that the working group recommends that the Western Cape Provincial Parliament would engage with Dear South Africa in future for citizen engagement on public participation processes to ensure that we streamline and that the comments received mirrors that of the request of this committee or the workings of Parliament, because it was clear, Chair, that not all submissions were from Western Cape residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honourable Mitchell. Thank you to you and Working Group 2 for that report back. We'll now move on to Working Group 3. Honourable America, will you be giving the feedback on behalf of Working Group 3?
For sure, Chair. Well,
thank you. Please proceed.
Good afternoon. In terms of the members of the working group were myself, Honourable Philander and Honourable Seku and Honourable Tehu. Chair, in terms of the first question posed, exposure to the virus and experience of the health system, not all respondents were directly exposed to the virus, and not everyone had themselves tested. The majority of people who had themselves tested, they however tested negative. Concerns were raised about the waiting time for test results, as well as the manner in which the test was conducted. The overall response to the way government reacted to the virus was extremely poor. That's the majority view, and more attention should have been given to the upgrading of existing facilities as opposed to building temporary ones. The response with regard to the quality of the health, our healthcare workers and frontline workers, very positive and good. However, the majority of respondents expressed a view that the government was erratic and lacked proper consideration to consider the circumstances of the citizens, and therefore eroded trust in government. There was no logic in terms of the expression in the way government made decisions, especially those with regard to the sale of tobacco and alcohol. However, appreciation was expressed by the majority of respondents with regard to the briefings of the President on the pandemic, but there was feeling also that it could have been done more regular. However, the regulations that were promulgated to deal with the pandemic negatively affected small businesses, and that was expressed by the majority of respondents. Insofar as food security are concerned, the view was expressed that government could have done more to ensure proper food security, and there should have been better control with regard to the distribution of food parcels. The majority of people who responded to this particular question further expressed the view that unemployment grew faster than the spread of the virus, and that in itself had a very negative impact on the economy and food security. Attitude towards the wearing of masks, the overwhelming majority felt that it's a necessary evil. Although they wouldn't like to wear a mask, they will comply. Furthermore, access to COVID grants, the view was expressed by the majority of respondents as 350 Rand per month was wholly inadequate in the light of the size of some families, and they also expressed that those who came into consideration for the TERS UIF funding, it was a frustrating experience to have the funds approved and to access the funds. And some expressed the view that there was a high degree of racism in terms of granting COVID grants. Although the virus didn't discriminate, the government did discriminate insofar as the allocation of support to small business in particular. As far as workplace safety is concerned, the majority of respondents could not understand why they could not go to work, or whilst they could go to shops, go to church, and shopping centers. But the feedback that we received was that access control into shopping centers and shops that they visited complied with the checking of temperatures and sanitization and the wearing of masks. So the understanding the context of the time when the survey was done, the majority of people did not return to work and were under a fairly strict lockdown at the time. The availability and use of PPE on public transport, the majority of respondents expressed the view that there should be stricter control, and the delinquent and lawless taxi industry needs to be dealt with in a way, and because it simply just, they couldn't make sense of the fact that there were different rules for the taxi industry and for themselves. They couldn't attend the families, visit families, and those kind of things. And furthermore, social distancing and temperature checks at school, majority conformed where it is required, and those that responded to the question, that complied where it was required, social distancing and the wearing of masks. The views on the reopening of ECDs, we didn't get many responses in relation to that, but the few that we did receive, there was an expression of unhappiness because some people went back to work, frontline workers, and the children could not go to attend the ECD centers because it remained closed at the time. The major recurring inputs on issues outside of the themes described above are, amongst other things, that the lockdown regulations was not clear enough and they were too strict, especially with regard to family visits. Secondly, during the hard lockdown, there should have been more education about wearing masks and hand sanitization and of the pandemic in general. Thirdly, the rationale behind the prohibition of the sale of alcohol and cigarettes was not very clear, and some that came out very strongly. The negative impact of the pandemic and on the economic environment, and small businesses are still struggling to recover, and the impact was quite severe. The people in the townships did not take government intervention seriously, and incidents of police brutality that were more prevalent in the townships and in rural areas than in suburban areas. And lastly, the poor manner in which government handled the pandemic and the regulations relating to the taxi industry and the enforcement thereof was fairly perplexing. And then, how can concerns, aspirations raised by the public to be reflected in our recommendations? It's felt that government should be more sensitive towards needs of the people and provide better and faster assistance to small businesses and other indigent households. There must be a clear and strong stance against corruption. Although the virus did not discriminate, government played a major role in pushing households further into poverty. And fourthly, proper attention should be given to the regulations, implementation and enforcement of it, because it contributed to ordinary citizens to become involved in criminal activities like the buying of cigarettes and alcohol on the black market. And furthermore, a differentiated approach needed to be followed during the various levels of lockdown, and as not all areas were affected in the same way. And lastly, government needs to communicate better with the people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honourable America, to you and all the members of Working Group 3 for having gone through those submissions and providing that feedback. We'll now move on to Working Group 4. Honourable Bartman, will you be giving the feedback on behalf of that group?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. If we could just have the report up as well, please. Thank you, Chairperson. So the colleagues that were part of Working Group 4 was myself. It was Ms. Pat Lekker, MS, not MR, Mr. Ricardo McKenzie, member, and member Vin Vogel submitted an apology, but then joined us late to the meeting as well in order to join us with the particular submissions. Firstly, I would also like to start similar to Honourable Mitchell's, Member Mitchell's working group. Our submissions were mostly from Dear South Africa, and the questions obviously posed by Dear South Africa were different to the questions posed by the Western Cape Provincial Parliament Committee. And thus, what we tried to do was looking at the submissions, the trends of the answers received, to not only slot in the particular submissions into the particular themes, but to also adequately capture some of the themes that were not part of our WCPP questions. In the theme of exposure to the virus and experience of the health system, two main bullet points that we have put together were that people in private hospitals received better service than those who went to public hospital facilities, and that was a view put forward from some of the submissions. Another view was that the lockdown was about getting the healthcare system ready, but that the healthcare sector is not necessarily ready for the second wave. Under the food support availability theme, people had the view that some were promised food parcels, but the promise was not delivered upon, that the communication around food security and availability was poor, that people were concerned about the food availability strategy going forward, and that there was no clear distinction about who received food parcels or criteria used to identify people who were entitled to the food parcels. In the theme around attitudes towards mask wearing, there were many submissions indicated that they refused to wear masks, and in contrast, there were submissions indicating that people should be arrested for not wearing masks. So it seemed that the views were quite polar on each end of the spectrum. Under the theme of access to COVID grants, there was a view that in many instances with UIF and TERS funding applied for by the employers were not paid over to the employees, which could be classified as UIF fraud. There was also a view that there were broken promises where UIF TERS was promised but not delivered, as well as stolen grant money. And that some employers applied for UIF for their employees at the same time, but only some employees received the money from the UIF. And then employers tried to share the money received between employees, which upset some employees. Under theme number 5 with workplace safety, similar to working group number 2, given the Dear South Africa question set up, there were no comments. Number 6, under theme availability and use of PPE on public transport. Similarly, there was a major concern regarding the 100% capacity in public transport, and similar to that, and I don't think we specifically put it in the document, but it was part of the discussion where we believe that there was overwhelming, people did not understand the 100% capacity for taxis compared to other regulations. Number 7, social distancing and temperature at schools, similar to working group 2. We received no comments on that particularly. Point number 8, views on the reopening of early childhood development centers. The view was put forward that the economy opened slowly, but the ECD centers remained closed, and this had an impact on parents who needed to return to work but did not have anywhere to send their children while they were at work. And some people did refer to the particular examples of other provinces outside the Western Cape that didn't have the ECDs open. Under theme B, asking the question, were there any major recurring inputs on issues outside of the themes above? And this is where we indicated the responses we got from these submissions, since majority of them were either related to national government mandates, as well as the questions weren't the exact same as the WCPP questions. So the inputs received included government's handling of the pandemic being extremely poor. Some people thought that the questions posed by the committee related to national government. So that part of the sentence actually refers to us as committee, that the questions posed and the answers we received actually relates to national government. The majority of the inputs received related to national government mandates. This was in respect to the government regulations. The Disaster Management Act regulations can only be gazetted by a national government. Second view is many people did not understand the scientific reasons used to decide the ban on alcohol and cigarettes. Some people called it unreasonable and irrational. Emotive language was used when people were speaking about these particular topics. The result was that the regulations, such as the ban on the sale of cigarettes and alcohol, turned ordinary people into criminals. The money used to buy legal cigarettes and alcohol went to the black market, and as a result, the black market has flourished. And in this regard, I actually would like to note that there was actually one submission that spoke about South Africa going into its, quote, glory, unquote. Next, there was a view that many people objected to the curfews imposed, saying they were unnecessary. The next view was that many people objected to the social distancing regulations and the contradictions related to these regulations. Some places could have 100% capacity, but people could not visit family. That particularly related to mobile vehicles as well. There was no social distancing at state funerals, but attendance was regulated at other funerals and events. Enforcement of regulations in suburban areas versus rural and township areas by police. Incidences of police brutality, which was perceived as more prevalent in rural and township areas than in suburban areas. Police were more involved in enforcing regulations than looking at incidents of gender-based violence, was also a view put forward. Next view put forward was that loss of business during the pandemic, and many businesses are still struggling to keep their doors open because of the impact of the regulations, especially businesses in the retail sector. And it was questioned the available mechanisms for businesses that have had to close for the 5 months, and the 5-month calculations based on the COVID lockdown. Next view was that some people thought that the initial lockdown was necessary, but that the continued hard lockdown was unnecessary and a violation of their rights. The next topic that was identified in the submissions, but could not specifically be put under the previous questions, is related to their health. The views put forward was that there was secrecy about deaths and lack of clarity around the reporting of deaths, particularly around COVID. That mental health concerns and assistance regarding this, and that government needs to be more aware of mental health challenges over the next few months, especially for all frontline workers, and the examples of nurses, doctors, and police were made. Another view was that South African doctors and nurses needed more assistance, but foreign doctors, specifically the Cuban doctors, were brought into the country to assist and were given certain privileges that South African doctors did not receive, such as laptops, as an example. Under the economy and business, views put forward include the homeless who are uncared for, as well as foreign citizens who are not part of formal social development system. These include foreign citizens who are involved in informal businesses. That load shedding compounded the impact of COVID-19 and broke already struggling economy. No provision was made during the lockdown for cheap electricity. Impact on the tourism sector, not understanding what government will be doing forward, especially regarding small businesses and the impact on them compared to large businesses, regarding the international borders being closed down and being lifted slowly, views that tourists from high-risk countries are not allowed into the country, tourists from low-risk countries allowed in, and regarding the questions regarding negative tests. There was views regarding the level of corruption and abuse in government during the pandemic. People were concerned about corruption and looting by public officials, and that government needs to look at consequences. Under the theme of education, there was a concern regarding the quality of teaching and learning from home, especially in underprivileged areas, that some learners did not necessarily have enough tuition time, that some learners felt that their parents did not have the experience or knowledge to assist them with their schoolwork, and that there was a result that some learners might choose to repeat grades and even drop out of school if their assessments showed poor results. In terms of the recommendation, as a working group, we tried as far as possible to put forward some recommendations based on the overarching themes, as some people within the comments would generally speak about particular matters but not go into giving particular examples. And some of these recommendations include requesting that the Department of Economic Development and Tourism assist small and medium-sized businesses that are closing down with business rescue procedures. They're requesting the Department of Development and Tourism assist informal businesses with cutting red tape in order to continue trading. Given the likelihood of a second wave, to ask the Department of Health whether the healthcare system is prepared and whether we have sufficient funds for a possible second wave. In terms of Solidarity Fund, there was concerns with the no communication regarding the criteria and where people apply, and there's a recommendation that there must be proper and clear communication to the public, and that small business should be prioritized over larger companies. Further, there was a view to recommend in terms of small business grants. Currently, the government's grants are mostly loans that need to be repaid, and then many small businesses could not apply for these grants because they would not necessarily be able to repay these particular loans. Further, it was put forward as a recommendation that in terms of the UIR grants that is not paid, that it's unacceptable that government departments are unreachable, and this was particularly regarding the views that that phone calls from those respective departments and emails went unanswered, and that the concern must be raised with the relevant government departments and entities. Further, it is recommended that the national government grants that were actually loans that needed to be repaid by beneficiaries, especially the grants to small and medium business, that if the businesses can prove that they have sustainable business plans, that these loans should be then converted to grants. There's another recommendation that the research and evidence for the respective health regulations that were gazetted should be published so that members of the public can understand the rationale behind the enforcement of the regulations. Next recommendation is that government should be more lenient in respect of non-governmental organizations and members of the public who would like to distribute food parcels to the public, and this was related to the comments of whether or not people can assist with, for example, soup kitchens. Next recommendation related to if there's a second wave, then government needs to relook at social distancing regulations and visitation to family members, given the contradiction of the regulations during the past few months. And this also stemmed from one person also made an example of how they could not go and see their son, but people could go to church and they could go to casinos and they could get into a taxi with 100% capacity. The next recommendation relates to closure of ECD centres, was flawed regulation and should be reconsidered if there are regulations imposed in the future regarding this particular theme. The filling of taxis to 100% capacity should be informed by health evidence and research, and if venues cannot be filled to capacity, then taxis should not be filled to capacity either. The next recommendation relates to tourists from high-risk countries not being allowed to travel to South Africa. However, there are the chance of tourists from low-risk countries being able to test positive, and that there should be a general test for negative tests for the virus in order to be allowed into South Africa. And I think that is the end of the document. Let me just see. Yes, Chair, I think that's the end of the document. And Chair, similar to working group number 2, I just would like to include the fact that we have no indication as to whether all or some or any of the particular comments were from residents of the Western Cape, specifically due to the format of how the Dear South Africa questions were put. And I think I probably speak for the whole working group to say that that the recommendation that working group 2 put forward to engage Dear South Africa would be a good way forward for the provincial parliament. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Bartman. Thanks to you and the members of Working Group 4 for having gone through all of those submissions and giving us feedback. We then move on to the final working group, which is Working Group 5. Honourable van der Westhuizen, will you be providing the feedback? Honourable van der Westhuizen, are you on the line?
Thank you very much. I just had my presentation up and then it was taken down again, and that in the process I didn't unmute myself. Do you see it on the screen now?
We do, thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, just before we start with the detail, the working group pointed out that we must keep in mind that obviously these submissions are not a random sample of the whole of the South African population, but that it was only people with access to computers, mostly people that had access to the advertisement, and that obviously the attention of certain groupings of people were drawn to the possibility of making submissions. So in summarizing this, it is not to say that this is a representative of the full spectrum of the population. Then secondly, in the case of Working Group 5, almost all the submissions only dealt with 4 topics: the government's response to COVID-19, the regulations, the compulsory wearing of masks, and whether respondent and or their family members have been tested. And obviously response to the last one was quite cryptic. Very few people commented outside of that framework. Now, in terms of the response by government, some recognition was given for the early response. The overwhelming majority of comments rated government's response to the pandemic as poor. And particularly the fact that that initial 5-week lockdown period was not used to prepare all the health facilities, and there's a general view that time was wasted there. Some of those that did criticize government's response did qualify that by contrasting it to the Western Cape province. And then the general consensus, I almost want to call it, was that the population's best interest was not taken into consideration by government, in that health was prioritized, but that economic hardships such as bankruptcy, retrenchment, loss of income, and short pay were not adequately considered when businesses were forced to suspend activities. I do hope the screen is also changing on your side. The general view on government's position on the banning of the sale of alcohol and cigarettes was that these regulations did little to prevent the spread of the virus, and that these regulations were punitive and unnecessary. There was some concern about the money that was spent on illegal cigarettes and alcohol, and also that this actually created ideal circumstances for criminality and the illicit trade to flourish. Quite a significant number of the people felt that the government failed them with these draconian laws, and that ordinary citizens were penalized, and that the focus should rather have been to provide psychological and economic support to citizens who had to deal with abuse, death of primary caregivers, and the loss of business and income. Also, there's a perception that there was some conflict within government and no consensus, and that the fact that the president did not allow for questions during his announcements was also a cause of concern. Then a significant number of submissions expressed the view that many regulations were not motivated or based by health and risk considerations, but that they were influenced to suit certain lobby groups, such as taxi and religious groups, which seem to have been quite successful in lobbying government. There's some unhappiness amongst respondents or the submissions that taxis, for example, was allowed to travel at full capacity, whereas social meetings were prohibited, or only a few people were allowed to get together. And then there was some anger as well at the fact that politicians were receiving a full salary when the population was suffering economically by decisions made by the very same politicians. In terms of the regulations, there was consensus and recognition for the fact that the pandemic required extraordinary measures. Secondly, there was a very strong feeling that came through that the regulations were arbitrary, illogical, and unnecessarily harsh, and not in the best interests of South Africa. There was a significant reference to the grabbing of power, and that government wanted to enforce draconian regulations. And I think it would serve government well to take note that many people have been very critical of that aspect. Also, that public input was apparently, according to the input we received, not sought before certain decisions were made. And health information on the virus and the spreading of the virus was not made available to verify the authenticity and effectiveness of the decisions taken by government. The regulations were criticized for the ban and the regulation of feeding schemes and soup kitchens, and mention was made that ordinary citizens had to step in with feeding schemes to feed the needy. Feeling was expressed that government could not effectively enforce the regulations. Members of the public felt that they were treated like children and that they were not trusted. And as an example of illogical regulations was the one regarding the closing of beaches. And some even saw political considerations in a step such as that. Again, many people were quite upset by the fact that the taxi industry was allowed to travel with 100% capacity when only half the people could go to work and so on, and a lot of people still had to remain at home and so on. Then, under the same heading almost as taxis was also the fact that casinos were effectively allowed a higher number of clients than, for example, the number of people allowed to attend a funeral. And people pointed out what they perceived to have to be numerous inconsistencies. For example, that schools were required to open while many parents were still not allowed to return to work. In terms of the wearing of face masks, and this is in line with what previous presenters also commented on, is that the general view was that people were willing to wear face masks, but there was a number of people that indicated that they were not at all willing to wear masks. But in general, and this was a repetitive theme, the wearing of masks is unnecessary, but I will do it. Then concerns about the negative aspects, people speaking of carbon dioxide and the viruses that may be trapped inside masks and so on, a surprising number of references to that. But most ultimately accepted that wearing of masks would be the new normal. And in that sense where people were critical of masks and the wearing of masks, some even pasted websites or links to websites dealing with the dangers brought about by the wearing of face masks. Mention was made that there were no standardized designs that masks should adhere to. Interesting it was that the submissions were silent on the cost of masks. The committee actually remarked that they were expecting that people would be complaining about this extra financial burden, but there was no reference to that. There were, however, a few people that indicated that masks should be provided by government or employers or schools, which I believe in the case of schools were the case, but this is what a summary of what we received. Then also the fact that people are allowed to take off masks in places such as restaurants seemed to be a thorn in the flesh for some respondents. They see that as being unfair, and again, people complaining about the discomfort of wearing masks. And then some people indicated that they knew of people that contracted the virus despite those people diligently wearing masks. And what we did pick up was that there was very little evidence or recognition that the masks are actually there to protect others from you should be infected. Then in terms that at one stage people had to wear masks. I think the regulation says that masks must be worn in public, and some people commented on the fact that they were allowed obviously to move around freely within the family, inside the family homestead, but that the moment they step outside that they and share a car, that they then had to put on masks, which they saw as quite silly. And then the last question, whether you've been tested, by far the biggest percentage of respondents, as one can expect, have not been tested. A significant percentage of the respondents indicated that they had them tested through private laboratories, and they referred to the significant costs that they had to bear for those tests. And we had a very interesting remark where one person said that she was held liable for the cost of the test by the employer, while the employer insisted on her taking the test. And when confronted, the reason why she was held liable was because the test result was negative, whereby she then thought that had she tested positive, then the employer would have paid for it. Now, in terms of recurring inputs, I think the following would be a summary of that. The first is the perception of high-handedness by government, and the abuse of the pandemic to infringe on people's rights, that many regulations were too strict and illogical. They fueled illegal activities, that there was a lack of economic or effective economic support for those that suffered economically. Social needs were not appreciated during the drafting of the regulations. Inconsistency, there's a very strong perception that I think we will have to address going forward. And then also that not all the regulations seem to have been backed up by evidence in terms of the spread of the virus. And then the fact that very little exceptions, for example, for people to travel where they felt a severe need or urgent need to travel, that the regulations did not allow for such exceptional cases. Now, in terms of how can these inputs be reflected in our recommendations, the rebuilding of the post-COVID economy should be a priority. Again, that those that were already vulnerable before the pandemic suffered the most, and that government support should now be focused even stronger on the needs of the poor. That some of the innovations developed during the pandemic should be retained and further developed. And there's reference to the distribution of chronic medicine to homes, where people don't have to go and queue at clinics. It was seen as something positive that could be taken out of this. Then also that strategies should be implemented to innovatively deal with the provision of emergency service and these infection hotspots, and that this should be escalated to national government as a form of best practice should further pandemics occur in the future. Also, that regulations in the future should be clarified, and people should have a better understanding of what is meant by the regulations. Where are the limits, etc. Then we believe that there's now an awareness campaign needed to improve the knowledge of the public regarding the COVID-19 regulations and the way in which the virus is spread. Social needs should not be ignored during future actions. Women were suffering during the lockdown and were abused, and social issues like these have not been addressed. And support for persons who experience domestic violence were inadequate. And then also government should review the social aspect of providing better support to the population who are in vulnerable situations. Again, these safe houses for abused women and children should in times like this be receiving a bigger support and be expanded. And then a victim support bill was mentioned as a possibility. And then also that future similar actions should allow for public participation during the pandemic and not create the impression that government decisions are only influenced by certain lobby groups close to government. And then just for a recommendation for ourselves, Chair, and that is the end then, that questions posed to the public for comment should have been perhaps segmented to derive a better response on the performance of the different three spheres of government. The responses we received didn't really distinguish whether the criticism was aimed at local government, provincial government, or the central government. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen, for the report back from Group 5. So thank you to all those groups. I think it's quite clear that there's quite a bit of overlap between the 5 working groups. So I'd like to then propose that for our reports, we ask the procedural officers to combine those 5 reports in respect of sections A and B, so that the bulk of the information is then captured and we'll just take the one point instead of repeating it 5 times where there is overlap. Is everyone in agreement with that?
Agree, Chair.
Then we need to look at the recommendations from each of the groups. I've asked the procedural officers to combine all the recommendations into one document, which we're going to have a look at now. And if we could have a quick discussion and see if the committee agrees with those recommendations. There might be some repetition, but we will deal with that as we get to them. All right, so working group 1, there should be continued communication campaigns on the wearing of masks and how to use them. Any objections to that recommendation? None. Then the second is also on communicating around the COVID testing regime, especially when there are changes. Are there any objections to that?
Nope.
None. UIF should open their offices for stakeholders to access funds.
No.
No. And then SASSA should assist beneficiaries with applications and be transparent in its processes, and should ensure that safety protocols are implemented and maintained at pay point queues.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We agree? Okay.
Agree.
Then
Yes.
financial support should be given to all affected people, not just on the basis of race.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Agree. Traffic officials should enforce the implementation and use of sanitizers in public transport, and the taxi industry should play an active role to enforce PPE compliance in taxis. Can we agree?
Great.
And then the SABC should play a bigger role in home learning.
Mm-hmm.
Agree.
Psychological support should be provided to children, elderly and disabled who reside in care facilities. Just one moment, Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm just looking at this one where it says traffic law enforcement officers. I'm sure we've passed that in, I think it's
here. It's in the top, it's on the top of your page here. Number 6, traffic officials should enforce implementation and use of sanitizers in public transport. And the taxi industry should play an active role to enforce PPE compliance.
Okay, I'm just checking on it, Chair. Perhaps I wouldn't want the traffic officials to perform that duty, as we know that they are overstretched already. But maybe see if this could not be done probably by the law enforcement officers. Just my thinking, Chair.
Okay. Well, maybe we could just find a general term, so whichever municipality or provincial department has the capacity. What would be, well, unless we put their traffic or law enforcement officials.
Yes, that would be okay with me.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay. Right, then psychological support should be provided to children, elderly and disabled who reside in care facilities.
That's fine.
Agree. Okay. Okay, so then working group 2, 1 is a comment. So I think we can disregard that. So we can, if we can delete 1.
Agreed.
Okay, Saida, can you just delete 1 then? Okay, perfect. Then government support and economic recovery plan is needed. We agree?
Yeah.
Public education on the grant process and government support systems should be offered to communities. Can we agree?
Agree.
Okay.
Yes.
Then socio-economic interventions by national government should be better implemented and communicated in order to make it accessible to the most vulnerable. So maybe we could actually combine 2 and 3.
Perhaps.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Okay, Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, number 2, public education on the grant process. Can't we then set grant process and support? Grant support, something to that
Okay,
effect.
agreed. Public education on the grant process and socio-economic support.
Yes.
Support from government. And then take out support systems. Exactly. Should be offered to communities. Then we can delete the rest. Is everyone happy with that?
I'm okay, Chair.
Okay. Okay, then this recommendation on the engagement with Dear South Africa, I'd like to propose that we put this recommendation as a recommendation from the committee in our minutes of this meeting, but not in the final report. As I just don't think it doesn't deal with the content, but the process, if you know what I mean. So if we can make that recommendation to the WCPP as part of our minutes. Honourable Mitchell.
Support, Chair. Support, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So that recommendation will be captured in our minutes, and I will write to the relevant WCPP department or to the speaker. Okay. Right, working group 3. Okay, government should be more sensitive towards the needs of the people and should provide better and faster assistance to small businesses and indigent households. Can we agree?
Agree.
Thank you. Honourable Mitchell, is that a comment?
My apologies, it's an old hand.
Thank you. Then there must be a clear and strong stance against corruption. I'm sure we can all agree to that. Although the virus did not discriminate, the government should have clear policies in place to assist households during disaster situations like COVID. Can we agree?
Agree.
Then proper attention should be given to the regulations and implementation and enforcement of them, because the regulations contributed to ordinary citizens becoming involved in criminal activities.
Proper attention
Okay.
should be given to the regulations and implementation.
Agreed.
Yes.
Thank you. A differentiated approach needs to be followed during the various levels of lockdown, as not all areas are affected in the same way. Agree? Okay, the communication, we've already captured that earlier, so I think we can delete that one.
Yes.
Okay, and then work group 4. Request that the Department of Economic Development and Tourism assist small and medium-sized businesses that are closing down with business rescue procedures. Can I propose then that we, because this is more precisely worded, take this recommendation instead of the one, I think it's 2 above?
Yeah.
Agree.
Agree, Chair.
So let's delete the one above rather.
Yeah.
Go up. Okay, there we go. No, down. It was just 2 or 3 sentences above. There we go. There we go. Work group 3, number 1. Okay, let's go back down again. Request that the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, informal businesses. Okay, perfect. Can we agree? All right, so this is not really a recommendation for the report. I would argue that that's again a procedural thing that the committee can look at. Perhaps what we can do as a committee then is ask the Department of Health for a report on preparations and funding for a possible second wave. Would everyone be satisfied with that?
Yes.
Honourable
Yes,
Bartman?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm satisfied with that resolution being part of the minutes. I just would like to ask if in that then session that we then ask that the department, that the provincial treasury is also part, as sufficient funds might have to come out of the provincial revenue fund.
Okay, so we're going to be asking for a written report. And then should we have a look at that and see if we need further input from Treasury, or would you like us to send that request to both Treasury and Health?
Chair, perhaps let's send it to Health, and if they say that there are things that Treasury needs to respond to, that we can perhaps then ask Provincial Treasury to respond to that which has not yet been responded to. Okay,
perfect. Right, then Solidarity Fund. We can just ask for information. Yeah, we can take out there's no communication about criteria and rather just say there must be proper, clear communication to the public on accessing the Solidarity Fund. Can everyone agree with that?
Yes, Chair.
Agree.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Small local businesses must be prioritized instead of larger companies. Do we agree with that?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Small business grants were loans that need to be repaid by the beneficiary. Many small businesses did not apply for these grants. Okay, so that's a comment. So can we delete that?
Agree.
Yes.
Okay. Then UIF grants that were not paid. Okay, so then we should say UIF grants, outstanding UIF grants should be paid out. and UIF should be contactable.
Yes, Chair.
Full stop, and then we delete the rest of the sentence. And the entity should be easily contactable by applicants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. Then national government grants were okay, then maybe this to turn it into a resolution is if businesses prove that they have sustainable business plans, then loans should be converted to grants. Then government loans should be converted to grants.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, and we can delete, yeah, perfect. Research and evidence of respective health regulations should be published so that members of the public can understand the rationale behind the enforcement of the regulations. Can we agree?
Agree.
Agree. Government should be more lenient in respect of NGOs and members of the public who would like to distribute food parcels to the public. Should we not say should allow? Government should allow NGOs to distribute food parcels, or
should allow.
Honourable Bartman, distribute food.
Chair,
Take out the parcels.
Clarity. The reason that was written in is, for example, where the NGOs, their own money, or members of the public with their own money were distributing food and having kitchens, soup kitchens. So that's specifically what that is related to.
Members of the public to distribute food to the public. Let's take the word parcels out because that has a different connotation.
You're speaking to Pat, but I'm in a virtual meeting right now.
Okay. All right, can we agree to that then?
Agree.
Okay. Then should there be a second wave, government needs to relook at social distancing regulations and visitation to family members. Do we want to go the route of this route, or do we want to just look at the current status? Or okay, is everyone fine with this as is? Honourable Bartman?
Chair, I just wanted to give some more clarity. That particular recommendation was if there's ever regulations that go back, for example, to a level 5 or level 4, that we can't have the ability to go with a full taxi to the casino, but you're not allowed to go see your family members. So that was the aim of this particular recommendation.
Okay, so then should we not say, should there be a second level 5 lockdown, level 5 and 4 lockdown? Because there might be a second wave, but it would be treated differently. Yeah, okay. Can we agree to that?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Then the closure of ECD centres was a flawed regulation and should be reconsidered if there are regulations imposed in the future. Can we agree?
Agree.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Filling of taxis must be informed by health evidence and research. If venues cannot be filled to capacity, then taxis should not be filled to capacity either. Could we just leave it at the first part of the sentence?
Agree.
Okay, thank you. Then currently tourists from high-risk countries are not allowed to travel to South Africa. However, there's also a chance that tourists from low-risk countries can test positive for COVID when they arrive. Tourists from all countries that test negative for the virus should be allowed to travel to South Africa. Can we agree?
Agree.
Thank you. Then working group 5. The rebuilding of the post-COVID economy should be government's priority. This will require drastic action in the review of economic and employment policies and legislation to support labour-intensive economic growth. Can we agree?
Yep.
Okay, those that were already vulnerable before the pandemic suffered the most. Government support should now be focused even stronger on the needs of the poor. Can we agree?
Agree.
Some of the innovations developed during the pandemic should be retained and further developed. This includes actions such as the distribution of chronic medicine to homes. Can we agree?
Agree.
The Western Cape government should summarise strategies implemented to innovatively deal with the provision of emergency services dealing with COVID-19 patients and infection hotspots. This should then be escalated to national government as a form of best practice should similar pandemics occur in the future. Can we agree?
Agree.
Regulations should be clarified for a better understanding of what is meant by certain specifications or stipulations. Do we need that now or?
No, but that
we can
also
delete
tie
that
in
one.
with, yeah, because it can tie in with the one that by working group 1 anyway.
Dis reg, ja.
Okay, Honourable Philander.
Committee,
Honourable Philander.
my apologies.
Chair.
Okay. All right. Yes.
That could tie in by working group 1, the first bullet, continued communication campaigns.
Agreed. Okay, so we can delete that one.
Yes.
And I think the next one as well is already encapsulated.
Yeah. Even 5 can be. It's also.
Yeah. Okay. Can we agree that we delete that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Women with an E are suffering during lockdown and abuse. Social issues like these have not been addressed, but we need to turn that into a recommendation.
Chair, I think those 4 can be combined perhaps into one recommendation.
So we do have
perhaps under number 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we can delete 5 and 6 and keep 7. Thank you. Is everyone in agreement?
Yes.
Okay.
Chair.
Yeah.
Point 5, you are saying national government. Can't we just say government and not put everything on national government? Because all the different spheres have a role to play.
Okay, so what is your proposal then? But I think we need to be
government.
Okay.
Let's say government.
Okay. Everyone in agreement?
Agree.
Okay.
And Chair, the new number 6, I think, can then also be deleted as it was would have been taken up into 5.
5.
Okay. Do we agree? Okay. Future actions and decisions by government should follow public participation and not create the impression that government decisions are only influenced by certain lobby groups close to government. Can we agree?
Agree.
Okay, perfect. All right. And then I think the last is just a comment. Is that correct?
For internal use.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So this is the recommendations then from the public participation process. We will still have the opportunity for more recommendations based on the other content from the report itself. But is everyone happy then with these recommendations coming out from the public participation and the public inputs?
Agree.
All good, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so thanks very much. We then have concluded this part of the meeting, which is the public submissions, the report backs from the groups, and the recommendations as a result. Then we do have some minutes to adopt, but before we do, I wanted to just test with the committee. I was going through the committee program with the procedural officers earlier this week, and given the volume of information that the committee has, and in order to finalize our committee report, because we're now in the stage where we're winding down this ad hoc committee, we had originally scheduled a meeting for the 23rd of October to adopt and finalize the draft committee report. However, it's clear that we will need more time to put that final draft report together. So we'd like to then move that meeting or cancel the meeting on the 23rd of October and instead use the 17th of November to give more time to finalize and put together the report. We were supposed to have also, once we had the final report, we had thought initially to have a public hearing on the report. But since then, we've had 2 months worth of public engagement where we've had oral submissions from the private sector, from NGOs, from unions, from schools, from private healthcare, from academia, etc., as you all know, from chambers of commerce. We've really had a lot of oral submissions from a broad spectrum of civil society in the Western Cape. And we had those questions which we advertised, and as you know, we got 17,000 submissions back from that. So my thinking, and something I wanted to put to the committee, is that given that we have done all of this, we have done an extensive public participation program for this committee. Is the public hearing on the report still necessary?
Chair, Member Botha.
Honourable Botha.
I think I concur that the input from the public was extensive, and even the platform created as ad hoc committee, I therefore would say that we don't need a public participation after the finalization of this report.
Thank you, Honourable Botha. Honourable Mackenzie, then Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, we received, I think you said 17,000.
Yes.
And I mean, the ones we went through was also a few of them, and I mean, it was extremely comprehensive. And I do think we should appreciate the fact that people have done so, but I would concur with Member Botha that we don't need public hearings on this stuff, because we received probably the most extensive I think this Parliament has ever done. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Chair, you know, we've really come this far with the help of the members of the community out there. And I think in the light that there's a looming second wave coming, it would be only proper to publish this and perhaps get some input more from the community members on the work that we have done, especially judging on the number of inputs that we've received from members of the community. And if we don't do this one last round, we would be failing our duty in terms of public participation. Thank you, Chair.
So what I neglected to mention is that the final committee report will go to the House to be debated. So all parties will have the opportunity to debate it. And then the final report will, of course, be sent to all of the stakeholders that participated in the committee over the 9 months, as well as to other bodies and governments and civil society that the committee so determines. So the report will be widely circulated to read, you know, what happened from day one in the health space, in the food security space, in the protection of the vulnerable space, and so on. I suspect that our report will be well over 100 pages long, so it'll be a very long report on the work of the committee. I just would like to then understand from you, Honourable Lecker, what would be the question put in the public hearing? What information would we want to ask the members of the public on that you think would then be necessary at the stage, considering that we have consulted the public extensively over this period?
Can I come in, Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. think I hear what you're saying, and indeed, in the spirit of what we call proper feedback to communities, the question would be, this is what we have produced after the inputs are received, and is there anything that we probably have overlooked in relation to all the submissions that we have received? I'm not saying we did not receive everything, but maybe communities will find that very small little voice out there that we didn't get. For instance, it's been on the news that the 6 months grant that has been given to people is not enough. There should be efforts put out there to continue sustaining members of the community out there, especially those who are no longer interested in looking out for a job. So what do we do? What is our responsibility as government? But also it goes out to say, we've heard everything that you've said to us. Now here is the packaged information that you gave to us. Would there be anything else outstanding? Because I know there's that little voice on the 6 months monies that were paid out to people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Lecker, and I fully agree with what you're saying. There will be those little voices that will continue potentially for months ahead. But I think then if we are winding down the ad hoc committee on COVID, perhaps the answer then is so that we can continue to make sure that if these, as you call them, little voices continue, that the ordinary standing committees then take those up within their necessary fields. So that, for example, if there is a grant issue, the Social Development Committee could take it up, or obviously the economic recovery and what have you will certainly be a key point for the Economic Development Committee and so on. Would that then satisfy that concern of yours?
Fine, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honourable Mackenzie, sorry, I note your hand. Honourable Mackenzie, is that a new hand?
No, Chairperson, apologies. I'll remove it. It was earlier on.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so then what we will do then is we will revise the last few meetings of the committee in our program, and we will circulate that. And then, as agreed, the 23rd of October will be cancelled. Tuesday, the 17th of November, we will then meet to adopt and finalize our committee report instead of having a public hearing. At that meeting, we will then make recommendations on what are all the entities and individuals and departments and what have you that this report should be sent to. And then we'll have it, once we all agree, we'll have it ATC'd and then request that it be debated in the House. And then that will mean that we will be able to conclude the work of the committee by the end of December. All right, so if everyone's in agreement, thank you very much. Can we please consider the minutes of the 26th of August? Okay, all right, attendance. So one of our fourth citizen engagement meeting. Okay, we can move down. Okay, okay, these were all the entities that were present. We had briefings by the Federation of Unions, up a little bit. There we go. The Federation of Unions in South Africa, the Cape Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Black Business Chamber, Mitchell's Plain Chamber of Commerce, Agri-Western Cape, Vinpro, and the Master Builders and Allied Trades Association. Okay, there we go. and we adopted reports. Okay, can we adopt the set of minutes?
Move to support, Deirdre Bartman.
Thank you, Honourable Bartman.
Second that, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Mitchell. Then let's move on to the 9th of September, please. Okay, attendance. These were the oral submissions that were requested from the public inputs that we received. Okay, consideration of minutes, and then some resolutions. That was the establishment of the working groups. All right, can we adopt the minutes?
Move to support, Deirdre Bartman.
Thank you, Honourable Bartman. Thank you, Honourable Philander. Then let's move on to the 16th of September. Okay, if we could make that a little bit bigger, please. Thank you. Okay, that was our previous health update. Okay, check attendance, please. Okay, can we adopt those minutes?
Moving for adoption, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Philander. Could I have a seconder, please?
Support.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Then we have to consider and adopt the draft committee activities report for the month of August. That's quite a lengthy report. It has been circulated previously, so I'm sure everyone has read through it. Okay, let's go. Page 1. So it's protection of the vulnerable, health, update and education, economic recovery, support and livelihoods themes. Page 1 is just the members of the committee and the establishment of it, so we can go through that. The introduction of the committee, it's the same as with most reports. We can keep going unless there are any objections. Rules of engagement, okay. Then this is on page 3. Any edits or amendments to page 3? Page 4. Any edits or amendments to page 4? Page 5. Any edits or amendments to page 5? None. Page 6. Any edits or amendments to page 6? None. Page 7. Any edits or amendments to page 7? There are none. Let's move to page 8. Any edits or amendments to page 8? There are none. Let's move to page 9. Edits or amendments? Let's move to page 10. Edits or amendments, please. Page 11. Edits or amendments for page 11. Okay, let's move to page 12. Any edits or amendments? All right, let's move to page 13. Any edits or amendments? None. Let's move to page 14 then. Any edits or amendments on page 14? None. Let's move to page 15. Any edits or amendments? None. Let's move to page 16 and 17. Are there any edits or amendments to pages 16 and 17? If there are none, let's move to page 18, please. Any edits or amendments to page 18? Let's move to page 19, the penultimate page. Any edits or amendments there? None, okay, and then page 20, any edits or amendments? None. All right, can we move to adopt the report as is?
Support.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Could I have a seconder, please?
It's Derek.
Thank you, Honourable America. All right, our report then for the month of August is duly adopted. All right. Our next meeting will then be on Tuesday, the 17th of November, to adopt the final committee report. We will, of course, endeavour to send you the draft report as soon as possible, as it will be very lengthy, and we'll try to give members as much time as possible to work through it, and we will then discuss it on the 17th of November. Which will then be this committee's final meeting. So thank you very much to all of you for your work, a very hard work, and in the public participation program. The meeting then, if there are no further comments, will be adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.